Hi, my name is Dr. Laura Beadling. I teach English, film, and screenwriting at YSU. So today I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you about how to write action. So action writing is necessary no matter what kind of writing you're doing. So if you're writing autobiography or comedy or sports or romance, any sort of writing, you're going to have to describe people doing things clearly and hopefully interestingly. So action isn't only car chases or explosions, which is often what we think about when we think of action sequences, but really any scene in which physical actions are primary are action scenes. So I want to start with some principles of writing action. And so we'll talk about these and then we'll look at some examples of this in action. And then also you'll have a chance to take your own stab at these things. So some principles of writing action. Number one, you can't let the action overwhelm your characters. We like stories because we care about people and what happened to them. So keep the story focused on your characters. You need to grab attention by using interesting images and strong writing. In particular, in terms of strong writing, you want to use strong specific verbs. So rather than generic verbs like walk, something that would be more specific and powerful would be stomp. So think about those verbs that you use. Try not to get bogged down in descriptions, particularly of setting. A little goes a long way. Otherwise, you get so in love with writing what things look like that you forget to have things happen and to have people doing things. And that's not terribly interesting to read. You can definitely use shorter sentences and shorter paragraphs. Like action itself, which happens quickly and without a lot of time or deliberation, your action writing should also move quickly. So shorter sentences in shorter paragraphs. But don't forget to organize those sentences and paragraphs to help your reader visualize what's happening and who's doing what. So a big block of all sorts of chaotic action is really difficult to read. Ideally, what you want to do is have shorter paragraphs that focus on one unit of action or what one particular character is doing or experiencing, and then another paragraph when you switch perspective to something else happening or some other character. So organization is absolutely critical here to keep things clear. Try to keep it to one idea per sentence with an occasional longer or more complex sentence. Try to keep paragraphs to one unit of action. When you're writing action, you want to prioritize external factors, what is happening, who is doing what, but it also helps to include some internal factors. So what are people thinking about? How are people feeling as this action unfolds around them? So while in action writing, the external stuff, what's going on, takes precedent, you can't entirely lose those internal factors. It's sometimes tempting to just list things because you've got a lot of action to get through. Nobody likes reading a list, however. And probably most importantly, don't forget the stakes of what's going on. And by stakes, we mean, why is it important? Why should people care? Why does it matter to the characters who are doing the action or experiencing the action? So let's read the first passage that I have here. While we're reading it, think about who is the audience, what is being explained, who and what is being introduced. Can you really visualize what's happening, and why is it important, those stakes? So the first sample passage, passage 1 here, is from the book Bound by Ice. So I'm just going to read it, and then we'll talk about it in terms of those principles that we just discussed. With a sharp crack and a fierce shaking of the ship, Lieutenant Commander George W. DeLong's worst fear came true. DeLong raced up to the Jeannette's deck, gripping the ladder with both hands as it creaked and swayed. The ship filled with water and twisted to one side. Her masts and smokestacks caved in. The Jeannette was going under. There was no way to save her now. If the crew hurried, they could salvage enough food and equipment to sustain them for the nearly impossible journey ahead, 500 miles across a violently shifting ice pack toward a frozen, inhospitable land. The 33 men were already in poor condition. The Jeannette had been frozen fast in the ice of the Arctic Ocean for more than 20 months, and several men were sick or injured. Fresh drinking water was scarce. The men were bitterly cold, always damp, and exhausted. All right, so that's the first sample passage here. And you can see several of the principles that we've talked about at work here. So first of all, we have one person introduced by name here, Lieutenant George W. DeLong, and a lot of the action is from his point of view, and it also focuses on the external factors. The Jeanette's filling with water, her masts and smokestacks caved in, but it also has some of those internal factors. So this is literally the captain's worst fear. He knows that it's going to be difficult to survive this. So priority on the external factors of what's happening to the ship, but also some inclusion of the internal factors. Also, we have some really short paragraphs here. Look at this second paragraph is literally 2 sentences, just about what's happening to the ship itself physically. It filled with water, it twisted to one side, both the masts and the smokestacks caved in. So just these 2 short, simple sentences that really convey a lot of the action, right? And so that's a very short paragraph featuring 2 very short, very simple sentences, and it conveys a lot of that information. Notice how much sensory writing is going on here. We hear auditory details and examples, like with the sharp crack. We also have these details about what it feels like with a fierce shaking of the ship. And so we've got some strong sensory writing. We've got some nice strong words, right, like twisted and caved in. So rather than just falling, her smokestacks caved in, right? We also have the stakes here, right, that this is going to be a nearly impossible journey, right? And what's going to make it so difficult is this violently shifting ice pack that's taking them towards a frozen, inhospitable land, right? And then they're already in bad condition. They're not really going to be in great shape to undertake this. So we get a lot of those stakes as well about why this is difficult and why it matters. So you can see a lot of these particular principles that we talked about up here. So we get the focus on people. It's very attention grabbing. It's got a lot of action writing. It's got some interesting verbs. There's not a lot of description of the setting. A couple specific facts, but again, a little goes a long way. We've got shorter sentences and shorter paragraphs that are well organized that helps it make it easy to visualize. Yeah, so we've got a lot of external factors, but also a couple internal factors. There's no listing, and we know why this is important and what's going to make it difficult. So with that, down at the bottom of the page, that was our first passage. I've also included a second passage. This is from very early on in the Graveyard book. And so you can read this one on your own and see which of the principles you think are being most adhered to, and then what it's doing well, and if there's anything that you think could have been done better in terms of this particular action writing, which is so important because it comes early in the book. Once you've had a chance to read this second passage and think about how it is adhering or not adhering to those principles of action writing, I have a task for you to think about how you might do. So think about a time when you participated in a sport or were involved in some sort of action, or you can think about your favorite action scene in a movie or a video game. But think about some times that you have been involved with action. Think about if you were going to describe that action in writing, who would the reader need to know? What are the main characters, right? What actions does the reader need to know? What does the setting look like? And then most importantly, what is at stake here? Why is this important to the story and the character? And so this can be as long and as and elaborate as you'd like, or it could be short and punchy, like our examples here. But writing action is absolutely a crucial skill to master if you're going to be doing any kind of writing whatsoever. Explaining who is doing what clearly and interestingly, and then also why it's important and what those stakes are, is just one of those fundamental writing skills. All right, well, I hope this was of use to you. Feel free to practice. And when you're reading books on your own, think about how they are dealing with the action that they are conveying. Notice these principles in action, because I think they are really key to understanding how to write and convey action clearly. All right, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your English festival.